So what we're trying to do, is find, help them foster these permanent, long-lasting connections, right? So they have someone, just because they didn't, adopt them, or because they, whatever, there wasn't like a legal permanency found, we have got to like help them facilitate these like relationships with people, whether that's in the community or they're, a long-lost relative or something like that. They need to have someone they can call, in an emergency. And then our other focus is on, developing relationships and networks with other support people that may not be lifelong or, super long term, but we really try to engage the community and develop these networks for these kids. Okay. And that's what I am very excited about talking with you all about.
All right.
Everybody has a role.
I like excitement.
Everybody has a role with this. You could be, if you're interested in, being a host provider, a home provider, for these kids. You have an extra room, maybe you're an empty nester, and you wouldn't mind having a, relatively clean 17-year-old live with you, and they, do it. You don't have to go through the whole licensing process if you want to take that risk to it. If you are a business owner, if you are a landlord, and you want to work with us, and we'd like to, find this kid an affordable apartment. They don't have credit history necessarily. They don't have, rental history. But if you can, work with us and kind of take the leap, like we would love to work with you. If you, business owner, if you're hiring, if you want to give a kid a chance on a job, and, we will work with you. We'll give them bus passes so they can get to their job on time every day. Everybody has a role with helping to create, these networks to help these kids.
Yep.
Okay.
And you touched on something super important, the fact that you do not need a license to do this.
Correct.
I had just found that out recently, actually, and everyone I've talked to did not know that either. Just in conversations with friends and just strangers, it's that knowledge isn't there. So maybe explain what the process actually is and how actually easy it is.
Right, yeah. So as you licensed foster parents, so you hold a license. You have a license number.
It took a long time to get.
Yeah,
right.
There's a lot of work that goes into that.
A lot of work.
Yes. So the idea behind it is, Orchards or any child placing agency has a license to operate with the state, right? So we hold the license to have this independent living program, and then it is our responsibility to assess and make sure that these placements, for lack of a better word, are safe and appropriate and work for the kid. And if the, young adult, the 16, 17, or 18-year-old is comfortable with it, we will make sure that it's, safe enough and, good for them. And that, sometimes it's really like, oh, they need a smoke detector. Okay, we're going to purchase that for them. So it works out. Or they need an egress window. Like, we're going to help them apply for this funds to get, an egress window. But it's really youth-led, the placements. And we have found that the homes tend to be more stable for these kids when they know the person who they're living with, as opposed to finding
a stranger or whatever.
Right. But it's also very helpful to have well-trained and well-intentioned independent living providers. So maybe someone has thought about being a foster parent. They don't want to go through the whole, not to discourage people, but it's a lot. It can be a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
So this creates an option. And even, the providers don't even we call them providers instead of foster parents. They don't have to live in the home. So if you have like a duplex, that's pretty common, where the, the provider lives on one side and they rent out the other side to the young adult, and they're there to be a mentor and be a support. But, they also kind of have their space and their privacy.
Yeah. And another question that's always been asked, and you mentioned, if somebody does want to become a provider, you would support them, but a lot of the questions are, what type of support moving forward, monetary, food-wise, clothing, things like that. What is Orchards able to do for those providers on that end?
Right. So all of the independent living youth receive a monthly stipend from the state, and from that they pay rent to the provider. So it's just an agreed upon amount between the youth, the provider, and the agency. So depending, sometimes if it's like you're renting out your whole house to them, or you're providing them with their own bedroom or something, we work out that amount. A lot of the kids have jobs too, so they can afford to, pay what's affordable. We generally shoot for around like $300 or $400 a month. That's like about the max that they can afford if they're not working. So if they're a high school student, like $350, like that's what they their quote unquote rent that they pay. And then we help them with anything that they're eligible for, as far as like food assistance. Like we provide clothing, can provide them with clothing, supplies, household items, things like that.
Yep. And on that note, I know there's some wonderful people out there that it's the I just blanked.
You almost said it. Foster closet.
Foster closet.
Yes,
Thank you.
love
Thank you.
them. Love them.
Oh man, those are some awesome people.
They are.
Well, explain foster closet real quick. Whoever wants to take that, just so everyone knows.
I think I know Wayne, Oklahoma, Macomb counties around here have it, but they're just these wonderful volunteers that maintain all of this clothing, new, gently used. They have diapers, they have wipes, they have supplies, they have anything that, these kids would need. And we fill out, usually it's like an online form that we fill out, and then they get it together within they're so fast, 2 or 3 days. And then they let the caseworker know it's ready for pickup. So, and they have emergency supplies available too, if there's an emergency placement.
Mm-hmm. And along with our theme, another way to provide, another way the public can provide.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, these are homes that the one lady we went to quite a bit, just her whole basement was set up like a store. Mm-hmm. And you'd go down there, there's rows and rows of clothes and toys and just everything. And it's
and they're
amazing.
on Facebook, I know. So if you need to find them, just Google or put in your Facebook, Foster Closet, and wherever you live, and it should pop up.
And we'll definitely get those out there as well.
Yeah.
So,
and then other supports. It's really a holistic approach. So we have a whole clinical department with trauma informed therapists and clinicians that will work with these kids. They can do family therapy, individual therapy. We provide the supports for their mental health. We provide educational support. So we're making sure that we're going to their conferences and we're getting their report cards and we know what's going on. And if there's any challenge with school, we're addressing that. We try to limit school changes as much as possible. So we'll do what needs to happen to keep them at their school of origin if we can, at least for a school year, so they're not interrupted in the middle of their school year.
That's important to remember, that anyone that's coming through Orchards is not walking down this path alone. So if you want to be a foster parent, if you want to be a provider, if you want to assist our children and families, you get supports from Orchards. Erin is a supervisor of a staff of individuals that just directly work with our older youth. They are some of the most dedicated people that we have at our agency, and they all feel really passionate about being able to make sure that everyone feels that they have the supports that they need to do what needs to be done in order to help our young adults as well.
And I can attest to that. And again, that's 5 years there, we had all the support in the world, and for those that potentially want to foster or adopt or be a provider, whatever, the support is there, and wonderful caseworkers, just all over the place, and phone call away, and it helps a ton knowing that you've got that support, and that you're not doing it alone. And so, because it is not easy, so for sure. But now back to with an interesting topic on the schooling and everything. If you want to touch on how, if a provider does take a young adult in, what options do they have for, again, depending on their age and where they need to go, what would they be able to do on that end?
We would find, depends if they're, moving there in the middle of the school year. Like I said, we try to keep them at their school of origin. So there are some funds available through a law, actually, through the state. It's called the Fostering Connections Act, and there we can assist with transportation by keeping them with their school. So in many cases, if there's no public transportation, which, in this area is really sparse, we can have a cab, pick them up, take them to school, bring them home at the end of the day, just for that school year. Generally, it's not like an ongoing thing, but to keep them, to prevent any disruption. Or they can be enrolled if they'd like at the school near the provider home.
Right.
Some of the kids do online schooling because they're very close. Like if they're in a credit recovery program and they're just a few credits away, they might do like an online credit recovery, which they can do online, or they can go, in person and do it. Or they're in college, locally, or they're in college, eventually further away and living on campus or something. But they can, the school, just like any other, the general population, they go to school. I did read a very scary fact, though, when I was preparing for this. It was about kids in foster care learning disabilities, which are pretty common. And I read that those with learning disabilities are half as likely to reach permanency.
It's interesting that you say that. One of our our interviews this evening is going to be a teacher that I've worked with in the past. She taught 3 of my children throughout her career, and now she works with special needs kids and kids with learning disabilities. And my question to her when I asked her to be a part of this is to explain to me, is there a connection between the foster kids and the learning disabilities, and what her experience has been working with those kids, because we get a lot of foster kids in our community, and it was just an interesting tie-in there.
I don't know a ton about, well, actually I do, about special education, the services that they offer, but I do know that it takes some advocacy to make sure that kids are getting the services and supports they need at school. So if you're in foster care, particularly if you're 16, 17, 18, and you're in independent living, you don't have a foster parent, who's advocating for you?
Right.
You've got yourself, you've got your caseworker. If you're lucky, you have an Orchards caseworker, but they're not all, I'm going to be honest, they're not, who's advocating for you? So that goes along with, I think, any service or support, not just in education, but that's a huge part of it too, the advocacy, like who's standing up for them during these IEP meetings and things like that.
Oh, I've been there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and actually, you just said it with IEP. Another for people wondering, well, if this young adult or child is in school and having tons and tons of trouble, the IEP is important at the school. If you want to touch on that for a moment.
Just to define IEP for folks that may not be aware of it, it's an independent education program where the school is required to build a curriculum around how it's going to best educate this child.
Right. So they offer, individualized accommodations.
Exactly.
So it can be anything from, extra time to take a test, or maybe they need some instructions read aloud, when the kids in the class don't. Any type of accommodation for any type of disability. And even getting the ball rolling, people don't know. I believe this is still the law. You have to request an IEP assessment or evaluation in writing. Mm-hmm. So you got to figure out who to send it to. So not to knock the schools, but just, being a kid in foster care, not having like a parent who's really, putting the pedal to the metal with that kind of stuff. It can be, it's not surprising that kids in foster care often fall behind educationally. I've been in more IEP meetings than I care to count. My son is Asperger's, so we had to every year from 3rd grade on. Fortunately, we have a really good social workers in our school system, and they were very accommodating, and it worked out really well. He's a freshman at Grand Valley now. So congrats.
Whatever they did it right.
Yeah.
And my daughter was struggling this year, so now we just did the same thing for her.